What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Tomatoito Boxing Show. Happy New Year, and welcome to the first episode of 2024. I'm a little bit hoarse, a little bit under the weather, but we're gonna push forward. There's no sitting around anymore. There's no waiting for that perfect moment. We gotta push forward, and what better way than to recap this past Saturday's big event that took place in Las Vegas, opening weekend for 2024, as far as the boxing schedule goes. And let's talk about it, because this was headlined by Vergil Ortiz and the long-awaited comeback for him. 17-month layoff due to numerous issues. We're going to go ahead and get into that. But it was a big weekend overall for Goldenboy Promotions, aside from the fights. Of course, anytime you have a big event, then obviously this wasn't like a big Crawford Spence type event or anything like that, but it was the kickoff to the boxing season, the kickoff to the boxing schedule of 2024. And of course, anytime you have something, you put together such a big event, there's bound to be, the doors are open for some type of controversy. And of course, we witnessed some controversy that is still lingering up to today, and I'm sure it's going to last a few more days. A lot surrounding Goldenboy. Big news that Goldenboy broke with as well, leading up to the weekend. And let's do our best to break everything down for you. So, Vergil Ortiz, Frederick Lawson was the headlining event. O'Hara Davies, who was the big signee for Goldenboy, expanding from their traditional American roster by way of North America, Central America, South America. They now expanded and brought over a British fighter with a decent resume in O'Hara Davies. He was going to make his debut at 140 pounds and be in addition to stacking this, what is turning out to be a super stacked 140 pounds, as most of the 135 pounders are migrating one division north. So he was going to be the co-main event against former opponent of Rolly Romero, Ismael Barroso, the Venezuelan fighter who seems to look older than he, or appears older than he is. Nonetheless, he is a force to be reckoned with, and this may very well be his coming out party this year, because the way that he performed on Saturday. Also, Arnold Barbosa made his debut for Goldenboy, and then additional news. So let's break this down in order. Why was it such a big weekend for Goldenboy? Well, Oscar De La Hoya and Bernard Hopkins have announced that they are expanding into the Las Vegas market. Of course, they promote fights all over the place, right? They go to Mexico, they promote all over the US and so forth, but they are establishing headquarters in Las Vegas. They were very clear in stating that they are keeping their offices, their original office in Los Angeles, and their secondary office, a sister office based out of New York City. But now they're going to put an emphasis on the Las Vegas market. They are going to open up headquarters there in Las Vegas as well, expand and focus. Their main focus seems to be, for the next 3 years, as Oscar De La Hoya stated, they are going to solely focus on bringing the biggest events and making Las Vegas the mecca of boxing, as it took over from the yesteryears of New York being the original mecca, Madison Square Garden being the mecca of boxing. Well, the New York and Atlantic City days of the 80s, the New York scenes of the 70s, and of course in the 90s there was some big fights that took place out there, and more recently, right, we saw Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano headline Madison Square Garden. That establishment is a historic establishment on its own. But the New York scene and the Jersey scene has dwindled. And Las Vegas definitely became the biggest player in boxing, leading into the mid-90s to the late 90s. And then we were seeing the biggest events being put there in Las Vegas by way of MGM Grand, Mandalay Bay, what have you. The first time that we ever crowned a four-belt era champion, where the four-belt era began, was Bernard Hopkins when he lifted the title from one Oscar De La Hoya, and that was at Mandalay Bay in 2004. So from there, Canelo ended up inaugurating the T-Mobile Arena when he dismantled Amir Khan. So Las Vegas has always put on some big events. UFC has basically taken a stronghold of that market, and rightfully so, because Dana White has created a massive monster and influence in the world of combat sports, in the world of MMA, and he's got Las Vegas wrapped around his fingers. De La Hoya is going to start diving in there and bringing boxing back. That's his goal. So they are opening offices in Las Vegas. They are planning to open their own version of the UFC Apex. They're going to open the Goldenboy Apex. That's the plans, where they'll be hosting their smaller events there and bringing up prospects as well. And then I believe they're also planning on, from what he mentioned, they may be looking at opening the Apex / Performance Institute, so they could start attracting more boxing talent there. Who else is based out of Las Vegas? Well, of course, the notorious Floyd Mayweather Jr. is based out of Las Vegas. So with TMT and Al Heyman and PBC, of course. Mayweather being the most notorious there. Well, De La Hoya is now going into enemy territory per se, but also a territory that he brought up when he was the face of boxing for so many years. He put Las Vegas on the map by selling out event after event after event and bringing the biggest crowds on the Mexican holiday, especially on those Mexican holiday weekends. There was no comparison to what Oscar De La Hoya was doing when he was at the peak of his career. So that's the big news, right? Then, of course, the news surrounding the event. Their biggest signee to date was O'Hara Davies. O'Hara Davies. The big news surrounding him, bringing him over from Britain and from England, and then and they were planning this whole crossover coming out party for O'Hara Davies, and that got spoiled. We're going to dive into that. Arnold Barbosa leaving Top Rank and debuting for Goldenboy now. He last performed February of last year. And then the 17-month layoff brought to an end, especially when Vergil Ortiz successfully made weight. This was a contracted fight at 156, but technically his debut at super welterweight, which is his new division that he's campaigning at. He successfully made weight, as did his opponent, and we had a fight, a headlining event. Goldenboy also announced on Saturday that Jose Ramirez has also departed from Top Rank and is now a Goldenboy fighter. Another 140-pound big name. Arnold Barbosa campaigns at 140. O'Hara Davies coming over to 140. Ryan Garcia. Jose Ramirez now. So that division is stacked, right? And of course, we got Teofimo Lopez, we got Devin Haney, we got Subriel Matias. So, big event. It attracted a lot of names. We'll also dive into that at the close of the show, because obviously we got to wrap up the fights and then we talk about everything else that took place. So, with that said, that was the big news surrounding Goldenboy. Huge news for them, because they're gonna plan to do some big things in Las Vegas, and big things coming for Goldenboy Promotions. It's taken them years. Of course, we know the history of Oscar De La Hoya and Goldenboy when he lost all his fighters because he was busy partying, and the well documented, overly documented, I think, past that De La Hoya, decorated past of De La Hoya outside of the ring, with drug abuse and alcohol and all this, and he's very open about it, very public about it, including the documentary, the HBO documentary that he released, a 2-parter, where he's very open about it, and that ended up causing Goldenboy, who was the biggest monster in promotions in the early 2000s when he decided to launch that brand, and he ended up losing the majority of his fighters. I think 95% of the fighters, or if not more, and Canelo being one of the loyal fighters that stuck with them, and a handful of others. Everybody else ended up being taken, swept under the rug from him by Richard Schaefer, handed him over to Al Heyman, and then PBC entered the market. PBC was born and entered the market, and with a big Fox contract, and you know the rest. So it's taken him years to get back in track. Nonetheless, he never sold the business. He never got rid of it. He kept working it by way of Robert Gomez, who's been his childhood friend, and he's continued keeping that business afloat, and Bernard Hopkins, of course. So good to see that he's been fully engaged for the last few years, but now more so than ever, he seems to be focused and zeroed in, very apologetic, very open. And when he speaks now, Oscar de la Hoya not doing his part in holding grudges, and just willing to work with anybody and everybody, and calling out other promoters as well, asking other promoters and shouting out other promoters to start softening up a little bit on the stronghold that they have on their fighters, and start being a little more willing and exercise a little more ability towards making bigger and better fights for the sake of the fans, for the purpose of the fan base and growing the sport, continuing to grow the sport. So let's get into the fights, because there was a lot to talk about. And we'll talk about Arnold Barbosa. Arnold Barbosa, who debuted for Goldenboy, came over from Top Rank. A lot of people don't know who Arnold Barbosa is, and he's got a solid resume, and he's going to be a solid threat at 140 pounds. He is willing to fight anybody and everybody, and his resume shows that. Yes, he was a little rusty. He hadn't fought since February of last year, which was his last fight for Top Rank. And none other than his last opponent last February happened to be none other than Jose Pedraza. So that alone is as big a name as you could get. Puerto Rican Jose Pedraza has fought just about everybody and anybody that you could think of. You look at Jose Pedraza's resume, and he's like a Jorge Linares type. Fighting Richard Comey and Jose Ramirez, Jose Cepeda, Chon Cepeda, Vasily Lomachenko, Ray Beltran, Antonio Moran, Gervonta Davis, just Edner Cherry. I mean, Jose Pedraza has fought them all, and he's slated to fight Keyshawn Davis. Former Olympian Keyshawn Davis, who is continuing to ascend in his career respectfully, and it looks like he's en route to have a big showdown against his former foe in the amateurs and Olympic realm, in Cuban fighter Andy Cruz. This is as big a test as Davis has encountered as a pro, and if he passes with flying colors, he'll get his 10th victory, remain with an unblemished record, and move on. But for Jose Pedraza, I mean, he's no easy test for anybody, and he's bound to give Keyshawn Davis toughest test of his professional career to date, and potentially spoil Keyshawn Davis's plans. Jose Pedraza is a well-rounded fighter who's starting to reach the latter stages of his career, but he's as big a threat as anybody, as he was for Arnold Barbosa last year. He lost a unanimous decision to Arnold Barbosa. Arnold Barbosa is an undefeated fighter. He is now sitting at 29-0 with 11 knockouts. LA native. And he was successful by defeating Solisani and Dejeni. And Dejeni was a stay busy. This was a good matchmaking job by Goldenboy because of his long layoff. They obviously wanted their new prospect, their new signee to, not prospect, but contender at that. They wanted him to look good, but get back to work and have a stay busy fight. And Dejeni is that type of fighter. He's not a gatekeeper, but he's definitely going to give you some good rounds and some good work. And Dejeni ended up losing this fight. Of course, he was stopped. South African fighter. This is the fourth loss of his career. He last fought in July of last year and lost to an up-and-coming prospect also from Southern California in Ernesto Mercado. He lost a decision to him. Ernesto Mercado is another fighter that you need to familiarize yourself with. This young man is 13-0 with 12 knockouts. The only one that he didn't knock out was Dejeni. Everybody else he stopped. A name that you'll recognize is Jeremiah Nakatila, former Shakur Stevenson opponent, and the guy that ended up knocking out Miguel Berchelt when Berchelt debuted at 135. Ernesto Mercado put him out in 2 rounds. So Mercado is another name that you need to be familiar with. And Jenny, the only one to not be knocked out by this up-and-coming prospect, this heavy-hitting prospect. Other than that, he lost to Prince de Lomo, who was a 500 level fighter. But he ended up getting caught, and he got stopped in the 6th round on that fight. And then the biggest name in his entire resume that he lost to in 2019, but the biggest name nonetheless, was Devin Haney. Devin Haney that was the 21st fight of Devin Haney's career when he faced Indigeni, and it was a unanimous decision win, a 10-round fight in 2019. Devin Haney, of course, unblemished to date, and Indigeni has had good opposition, good solid rounds, and he was going to provide that test for Arnold Barbosa. A good fight for him to come back, not a tune-up fight, but a stay busy fight, a get back, get the ring rust out and so forth, and get the kinks out of your armor, because you've been off for nearly a year, for 11 months. So the upside was there for Arnold Barbosa, and of course for Indigeni if he would have pulled off an upset, but he's not that type of fighter. But he did provide a decent test for Barbosa. Barbosa didn't look completely excellent, but he looks good. He looks fluid. Hopefully he gets... Because of the whole contractual thing and everything that was going on last year, well, he basically set out the entire year until he signed up with Goldenboy, and then now he debuts for them. Hopefully, he gets at least 2, maybe 3 more fights this year. But if he manages to get another 2 fights this year, that'll be a busy year for him between camps and rest and so forth. If he gets another 2 fights and he already kicked off on the first weekend of the year, he should be able to get another 2 fights this year. That'll be a good busy year for him, and hopefully get himself into title contention if he doesn't in his very next fight. So Arnold Barbosa stops Indigeni in the 8th round, and he remains unblemished. And now you know who Arnold Barbosa is. Solid resume for Barbosa. I just gave you one name, right? I went off on a rant about Jose Pedraza, but I'll give you some other names that Barbosa has fought. Prior to Pedraza, he ended up beating Danielito Zorrilla. Zorrilla is the last opponent that Prograis had before the Haney fight, and the reason why Haney ended up choosing Regis Prograis to be his debut at 140, because he felt that Regis Prograis was limited in what he could do against him, especially after his performance against Zorrilla. Zorrilla gave him... A lot of people thought Zorrilla beat Prograis. Arnold Barbosa has the nod and gave Zorrilla the first loss of his resume. He's fought Antonio Moran, Ricky Sismundo, a veteran, Mike Alvarado. If you remember Mike Alvarado, he was, of course, he's an older fighter, retired now, but he was involved in that famous trilogy against Bam Bam Brandon Rios, which was a new age Gotti Ward type fight where they just went at each other. Those were bloodfests. Then he got into a nasty fight with Ruslan Provodnikov. And against Juan Manuel Marquez at the Great Western Forum, a fight that I got to go see, that I witnessed in person because I was such a big Marquez fan, and this was bound to be fireworks, and it sure was. So he's got some good names in his resume, and he continues to get better. Now that he got busy at the beginning of the year, Arnold Barbosa is bound to be in some big fights this year. Hopefully he gets into a big fight and Goldenboy lines him up with a bigger name in his next outing, which I believe will happen. He ended up getting into confrontations with Rolly Romero, who was in attendance. He got into a back and forth with Teofimo Lopez, who was also in attendance. A lot of people were in attendance. There are big names that were present there on Saturday. Another one was Devin Haney's dad, Bill Haney, who had a run-in with Bernard Hopkins, and they ended up Hopkins ends up shoving Bill Haney or bumping into him, telling him to go to the bathroom so they could have a conversation. That was a whole scene that took place there. But Barbosa getting in the face of Rolly Romero and Teofimo Lopez, wanting those fights, calling for Ryan Garcia. And I hope he gets into a fight with one of those fighters. It doesn't look likely, not for his next outing, but he'll get... And then Jose Ramirez being signed, I mean, there's another possibility, an easier fight for Goldenboy to be able to put together as well. Or maybe a stay busy fight with Ryan Garcia if Ryan Garcia doesn't land the fight that he's asking for now. And quick side note, Ryan Garcia update. Ryan Garcia wanted to fight Rolly Romero after his victory over Duarte, and then went to social media within days later and put the pressure on Goldenboy and told Oscar to get him the Devin Haney fight. They've been going back and forth on social media. Ryan Garcia seen training and doing 3 a.m. runs with Floyd Mayweather Jr. out in Las Vegas. Something that disturbed Oscar, and he was vocal about it in one of the interviews leading up to this Saturday. Now Ryan Garcia has changed his tune, and a lot of people think that it's because Mayweather's in his ear. Now he changed his tune. He has backed out from the Devin Haney negotiations and is now putting pressure on Oscar to go back and revisit the Rolly Romero negotiations. Remember, that fell through on social media because Ryan told Rolly that he was taking too long and his people were difficult to deal with. So he moved on to Devin Haney. It looks like those fights were in talks. Bill Haney was in attendance. I just mentioned that this past Saturday and supposed to be in conversations with Goldenboy. And then he's having a back and forth with Bernard Hopkins, and obvious animosity being displayed by Bernard Hopkins towards Bill Haney. If you're trying to get a fight, not by Oscar. Oscar was really calm and he said he was going to have a meeting with Bill Haney and that was the plans. But then you got Bernard Hopkins going back and forth and including pushing Bill Haney. If there's a way to kill a fight right there, I mean, that's it right there. That cross from professional into personal, that's the way to kill a fight right there if you were really trying to be serious about negotiating Ryan and Devin. And what happens if Oscar gets in there and does negotiate with Bill Haney and gets Ryan the Devin Haney fight, but Ryan doesn't want it anymore. He wants Rolly Romero. So now that's going to add even more controversy of fighting with his promoter and so forth. So who knows? That's a whole drama going on. Quick side note, because as that was happening, Barbosa had just finished his fight and he was out in the crowd having a back and forth with Rolly Romero and later on in the hallways with Teofimo Lopez post-fight. So Barbosa, successful in his debut for Goldenboy and his return to the ring. We move on to the co-main event. And the co-main event was Ismael Barroso, the Venezuelan fighter, against the big signee from across the pond in O'Hara Davies. Why is O'Hara Davies being pushed to us? Why was Goldenboy so high on O'Hara Davies? Well, O'Hara Davies is a solid fighter. He came over with the 25-2 record, 18 knockouts to his favor, who, similar to Arnold Barbosa, O'Hara Davies, he's like a mixture of Arnold Barbosa and Endogeni, who we were just speaking about, who's had a good stay busy type resume with lower level opposition and prospects, and some veterans with more losses than wins on the record. But he was being built up with a natural progression of getting into big fights. He had a good run in 2016, 2017. He's an older fighter, by the way. Young in age, but he started his career in 2014. When he ended up fighting Andrea Scarpa back in 2016 and then followed by Derry Matthews, those were two decent names at that time in 2016 and 2017 that managed to get him, those performances managed to get him into a big fight against up-and-coming Josh Taylor. He's not the one that lucked out with Josh Taylor, but rather Josh Taylor, the matchmakers chose O'Hara Davies because he had amassed a good portion of wins up to that point with mid-level and decent level opposition, but it was going to be a tough test for then 9-0 Josh Taylor. So O'Hara Davies at that time was 15-0 going into that fight against undefeated Josh Taylor. It was a good crossroads, good meetup of two up-and-coming prospects. O'Hara Davies, the more experienced of the two, and he was stopped in the 7th round. Josh Taylor ends up stopping O'Hara Davies, but that ends up giving a legitimate name to O'Hara Davies's resume. He amassed a couple more wins against prospects. Two of them. One of them was a 13-0 prospect. The other one was a 21-1 prospect, but nobody of note. O'Hara Davies went on a 3-fight win streak and then got himself into a fight against Jack Catterall. Jack Catterall was 22-0 going into that fight. That was in 2018. And he lost a unanimous decision to Jack Catterall, all 12 rounds. Good, solid work that O'Hara Davies is putting together now. He's going from lower level opposition, and then he's fighting the guys that are starting to reach the peaks of the division, and he's able to hold his own against them. This is what was raising the stock of O'Hara Davies. Yes, he came up short again on what was another big fight for him with Jack Catterall, but he managed to go all the way with Jack Catterall. Comes up short on points. Then he gets Miguel Vasquez, a veteran of the sport, and beats him in his very next fight after dropping that decision loss to Jack Catterall. Fights him in a 10-round fight and gets the nod. He's on the up and up at that point. He continues to fight prospects and up-and-coming stars with decent records. Fights Tyron McKenna in 2020. And then more recently, he fought Louis Ritson, who's a 23-2 fighter at that time, or now 23-3. He ends up knocking him out. And that was in March of last year. From there, he was inactive the rest of the year, gets signed by Goldenboy. That was the big news that broke in 2023 for Goldenboy, and they were bringing him over from across the pond and have his big crossover and coming out party here stateside, and this was it. He was supposed to have fought in November, I think, and for some reason that fell through, and it got delayed to now, to this past weekend. So he fights for the interim title against Ismael Barroso. All the signs were there. Everything was laid out for him to get his hands around this title and then try to unify with Rolly Romero, get himself into a title and be one of the top dogs at 140. Ismael Barroso, the Venezuelan older fighter, he's definitely the more experienced fighter of the two. It was a solid test for O'Hara Davies, but one that was slated for O'Hara Davies to have passed with flying colors. And his plans were spoiled. O'Hara Davies got stopped, got ran through by Ismael Barroso and the rocks that he has for hands in the very first round, in the opening round of the fight. Davies goes down twice. Fight is brought to an end. We last saw Barroso in that controversial stoppage loss to Rolly Romero. A fight that many thought that he was winning. A fight that many thought that he was giving And to Rolly Romero's own accord and own account, he was heavily tested by Ismael Barroso. It was a questionable stoppage that a lot of people thought shouldn't have been. Both of these fighters were hurting each other. Romero and Barroso were hurting each other, but Barroso seemed to be getting the leg up on Rolly Romero, hurting him several times that we thought Barroso was going to pull the stop. And to date, this week that Rolly Romero was in attendance to the fight, to date, he was asked numerous times by different reporters, and he brought it up. He brought it up that Ismael Barroso is a monster in the division. He admitted that he's never been hit harder, whether it was in sparring or pro. He said that Barroso is the hardest hitter and the hardest to have hit him, and he was being damaged by Barroso's punching power, to his very own admission, which is very humble of Romero to say that. Of course, Romero with that win over Barroso ended up securing the WBA title, and Barroso with this victory over O'Hara Davies, he spoils the plans in the coming out party for O'Hara Davies, but he himself now gets his hands around the interim version to Rolly Romero's title at 140 and pushing for that rematch, which should be insane, because if it's either that's going to happen and the WBA is going to step in, or they're going to hold Barroso aside and make the fight with Rolly and Ryan Garcia meanwhile, which is what Ryan Garcia has ordered Goldenboy to seek for him now. Very interesting the way that's playing out. 140 is stacked. And that was your co-main event. A 1-round stoppage of O'Hara Davies. Does that mean that it's pie on the face of Goldenboy? Does that mean that it was a fluke? Does that mean that O'Hara Davies was just, they were selling it to us and he's not the real deal and this? No, it doesn't. We're so quick to discard fighters when they lose. But it's a tough sport, and one punch could change the whole thing, the whole dynamic. Throwback to what Tyson said, right? The famous Tyson quote that everybody has a plan A until they're punched in the face, and then everything flies out the window. Everybody has a game plan until adversity sticks his head out. So that's what we encountered. So I want to see what O'Hara Davies looks like. I hope he doesn't sit out, because he sat out all last year. Similar to what we just said about Arnold Barbosa, similar to what we just talked about on the Day of Reckoning in December, where the layoffs were a big storyline. Whereas Anthony Joshua, who was successful against Otto Wallin, he continued to stay busy after his subsequent defeats to Usyk, whereas Deontay Wilder was coming off of a 14-month layoff, and look at how he performed. But then Bivol, who performed on that very same card, was gone since his fight last November against Zurdo Ramirez, or November of 22 at that, and then look at how he performed. A layoff could be a detriment for some, for most, if we're being generous. But it could play a huge benefit to others. It did for Bivol on that night. It did for Barbosa this past Saturday. But it didn't pay off for O'Hara Davies. This reminded me a lot, when this stoppage happened, it reminded me a lot of what we were just talking about in the controversy that surrounded the fight between Oscar Duarte and Ryan Garcia, because Ryan Garcia was claiming that Goldenboy was setting him up with a knockout artist after he's coming off of a stoppage loss to Gervonta Davis. He was making the claims that Goldenboy wanted him to lose. Therefore, they put him against a knockout artist. And we talked about it on the episode leading up to the fight. And when we recapped this, that boxers took that as a prideful factor back in the day. That if they got knocked out, they wanted to get into the ring with another knockout artist to prove the point that, hey, yes, this guy was better than me and he stopped me, but it doesn't mean that I'm a diminished person or that I'm a shadow of what I once was. Get me in with another power puncher and let's go. And then when they would come out successful, then it was like, hey, it's just because that guy ended up catching me on the button, but it doesn't mean that all power punchers are going to just destroy me, that I don't have a chin, that I don't have the fortitude to be able to stand on my own and stand on my feet and withstand the attack, the assault. You wanted, your ego almost got you into that. Yet Ryan Garcia was seeing it on a whole different angle, from a completely different angle, where the matchmaking was great and the fight ended up paying off to his favor, right? Because he figured it out during the fight that Duarte, who was a more flat-footed fighter, would tuck his head and just grind out punches to the body. And by doing so, he was exposing himself quite a bit. And the uppercut was there all along for Ryan Garcia. And when Ryan Garcia figured it out, he leveled up. He stopped Duarte and came away with the victory. That's what boxing's all about. And this fight reminded me so much, where O'Hara Davies with a long layoff against a big heavy hitter that we know of, Ismael Barroso. Yet he's an older fighter, so people put what they see, judge the book by its cover, versus the trajectory of Ismael Barroso of having strong hands and good punching power. And this fight reminded me of that, where look, this is what they were thinking was going to happen. At least Ryan thought this is what was going to happen to him and what Goldenboy had planned for him, that Duarte was going to just knock him out. But there's a test. O'Hara Davies got caught by the heavier puncher and stopped. This is what boxing is all about. The test. This is what we love as fans. Can this fighter overcome this obstacle? This is what this fighter poses as a threat, and this fighter brings this to the table. Let's see how it plays out. O'Hara Davies didn't even get a chance to start developing his game plan when Barroso just started landing heavy leather and stopped him. 1 round fight, less than a round. So I want to see how O'Hara Davies is going to bounce back from this, because he has a good body of work. He's been in with Josh Taylor. He's been in with Jack Catterall. He's been in with Miguel Vasquez. He's been in with numerous prospects who had great undefeated up-and-coming records, or 10-1 records, 11-0 records, 12-1 records. Look at his resume. O'Hara Davies is a good boxer with a good, solid body of work. This happens. And it happened. The bounce back is where the answers are going to lie. I hope he doesn't lay off for too long. I hope he returns, hopefully around March, maybe April, and stay active and get back in the ring and get back on the win column. But this, what happened Saturday, is going to say a lot to us and show us a lot about O'Hara Davies and who he is as a fighter in his very next fight, and how he bounces back. We move on to the main event, headlined by Vergil Ortiz versus Ghanaian fighter Frederick Lawson. Looking at this fight on paper, you look at the records and you look at the fight as to how it could potentially play out. You try to go watch some video. There's not a lot available on Frederick Lawson, but there was some fights that you could watch of Frederick Lawson where you could learn about the fighter, his habits, how he stands, how he throws. He was coming into this fight with a 30-3 record, 22 knockouts. But the curious thing was that every one of his losses had come by stoppages, as did this one on Saturday. He had fought Brady Prescott. He had fought Mohamed Tagle, Kevin Bezier. Kevin Bezier was the first loss of his career. A fighter by the name of Juan Ruiz stopped him in 4 rounds in 2019. Charles Hatley was the most notorious of his losses because he was stopped in the 10th. Charles Hatley damaged him. I think, if I remember correctly, he walked away with an injury to either his orbital bone or his jaw. One of those two. I think he came up with a fractured jaw or a broken jaw or something like that. I may be wrong, but something's telling me that I have that inkling that I think it was that fight with Charles Hatley where he succumbed to an injury and was stopped down the stretch as the fight was coming to an end. That was his last defeat. He ended up having 2 more wins. And then he gets into the fight with Vergil Ortiz. He's a naturally bigger fighter. When you look at Frederick Lawson and his body of work, he has a wide stance, not the best of footwork, doesn't have high quality footwork, doesn't have immense speed that could bail him out or set the pace or disrupt the pace, has decent punching power. But the one thing that I walked away from watching Frederick Lawson film was whenever he starts engaging and throwing power, he exposes everything. His entire torso and head are completely exposed because he's just fully committed to landing his power. And his power is thrown by way of looping punches at odd angles. Couple hammer fists that I saw him throw in there in one of the fights that I saw. Other than that, really wide angled power punches. Not your traditional hook, wide angled punches. And when I look at that, I immediately think of Vergil Ortiz, who has a high pedigree boxing, high level of boxing, coming up from his amateur days with USA Boxing and Olympic style boxing. Vergil Ortiz holds a really high guard, really tight, and shoots down the center like a sniper. When I'm looking at a fighter who tends to open his entire torso and face up, and he throws wide punches, that's the immediate thing that came to mind. Vergil Ortiz is going to pick him apart down the center and just jab him. I didn't see a path to victory for Frederick Lawson, except for one thing: the puncher's chance that every fighter has when they step through those ropes. The puncher's chance because he's the bigger fighter. When we look at Vergil Ortiz, 17-month layoff, remember that he was fighting at 140 pounds. So we see Vergil Ortiz who came up from the lighter division, getting hit by smaller fighters, progressed into the welterweight division, but he made his body of work at 140 pounds. So my inkling was, how's he going to handle if he gets hit by these fighters? Remember that, yes, it was a 156-pound fight, that as it was agreed and contracted, but this was his debut as he wants to campaign at 154 now. So when you look at 154-pound fighters, when we talk, say, Errol Spence, right, there's reports that he gains up to 190, up to 200 pounds between fights. And then those weight cuts, we used to hear about this from Fernando Vargas back in the day. More notoriously, when he, between matches with, when he fought the back-to-back matches with Shane Mosley, why Shane Mosley pushed for that rematch. We knew about stuff that happening like this back in the Roberto Duran days, when Sugar Ray Leonard got him into a quick rematch because he would hear about Roberto Duran shooting up in weight. So when I start thinking about this, I'm like, Frederick Lawson could very well be a 180-pound man on a day-to-day basis who cuts weight, or a 170-pound day-to-day fighter who cuts down to 154. Whereas Vergil Ortiz seems to be about a middleweight, cutting down to 140 pounds, 147 pounds. So my immediate thought was, how's he going to handle the power if Frederick Lawson just happens to land one of those looping punches or wide punches and hurts Vergil Ortiz, who's been fighting smaller fighters the majority of his career? Nonetheless, what backs up Vergil Ortiz? His style. He's willing to take it, and he's going to give it. And that's usually where he pressures the fighters. He's a fun fighter to watch with good level boxing, good pedigree, good knowledge, great adaptation, great instincts. He ended up having 6 or 7 fights at welterweight, which is good because he was fighting bigger fighters. And he was calling out Terence Crawford the entire time. Remember, he debuted at welterweight against Mauricio Herrera. Then he faced Antonio Orozco, Brad Solomon, Samuel Vargas, Maurice Hooker, which is where I got to see him live out in Fort Worth, Texas. The Mean Machine, Kavaliauskas, who was a former opponent of Crawford. And then Michael McKinson, which was August of 22. After that, if you recall, he was supposed to come back and fight, and had those hiccups where he couldn't make weight, had to pull out due to severe dehydration. Then try to come back again last year. And again, this was the more severe of them because he ended up contracting rhabdo, which is a condition where your kidneys begin to shut down and then followed by your muscles. A condition where many people succumb to that. Succumb to the virality of that state. Body shut down and people pass away. It's a fatal condition. A lot of the reports back then were coming back to he must be on roids or he must be on something because severe dehydrations like that, the water cut, something else is going on with Vergil Ortiz. Nothing ever got proven. It was just rumors and hearsay and reports where he once again pulled out of a fight. But more notably, and as vocal, as humble as Vergil Ortiz is when he's talking about it, he tears up, especially in the lead up to this fight. He was tearing up, stating how he felt like he nearly lost his life. He was going to succumb to the condition of rhabdo. Fatal state. that where your body just succumbs. He overcame it. Did away with the weight cuts and is now campaigning at 154. The only way that I saw that Frederick Lawson could potentially stop Vergil Ortiz was by way of power, because it's a bigger fighter who's faced naturally bigger opposition. Vergil Ortiz, with the better boxing, I honestly saw Vergil Ortiz taking this maybe around 4 rounds, between 4 and 7. It was going to be a stoppage because of accumulation of punches and the way that he lands. It was just apples and oranges here. Vergil Ortiz just levels above Frederick Lawson, boxistically speaking. So it was headed for a Vergil Ortiz win. It was slated that way. But the intrigue was as to how he would handle the power in a new division, a heavier division. How he was going to look after a 17-month layoff. And if that layoff had a big effect into how he was going to approach the fight. When the fight starts, opening bell rings, and Vergil Ortiz comes out with high guard, tight, and begins to throw his jab. And that left jab is a piston that when it lands, it holds you in your tracks. It stops you in your tracks or pushes you back. His power is here. His power transcended from 147, well from 140 to welterweight, and then now his power seemed to be there because he was moving Lawson when he was connecting. His speed looked great. His power looks like it's accompanying him to 154. His combinations as fluid as ever. And he looked like he had not been away from the ring that long. He looked good. But we saw very little of him. We didn't get to see his gas tank. We didn't get to see his stamina be tested. We didn't get to see any adversity because he took the fight to Lawson. And as the fight is dwindling down, as the first round is dwindling down, they circle. Lawson circles away from a corner, from being cornered towards the center of the ring, throws a left hand, exposes his head, and Vergil lands his piston of a jab on the cheek, covering the jawline to the orbital bone of the right side of Lawson's face, stumbles him, sends him stumbling back, backstepping to the ropes, and Ortiz lands an approximate of 13 punches. Not all of them landed cleanly, but 13 punches in succession, which led to Tony Weeks stepping in and stopping the fight. 1 round performance, back-to-back, the co-main event, which we just talked about, and then the main event. Vergil Ortiz, victorious, remains undefeated, 20-0, 20 knockouts. Vergil Ortiz is quickly becoming the face of boxing. Big things in play for Vergil Ortiz. It's awesome that he's back. It was great to see him back. We just saw too little of him. I wanted him to get some rounds in because after a long layoff like that, he needed to get those kinks out, similar to what we just talked about with Barbosa and with Bivol in December. He needed to get those kinks out. He needed to get some rounds under him and get that work. So all that whole camp comes to fruition on fight night. and he gets to experience a little bit of work in this new division that he's going to campaign at. It didn't happen that way. The criticism and the critique came at the expense of one Tony Weeks, the veteran referee who stopped the fight, jumped in and waved off the fight. A lot of people thought that punch succession, because the punches were not landing clean, some were breaking the guard, some were breaking Lawson's defense, but the majority of them were hitting him on the arms and on the outside or missed. Ortiz was hitting with everything. You watch that again, you could literally watch the whole fight. I'm not going to tell you to watch the highlight, watch the whole fight because it's that quick, but he was punching hard. Nonetheless, not everything was breaking the guard, not everything was landing clean. So, if Tony Weeks could have given Lawson, coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? But if Tony Weeks could have given him a standing 8, and Lawson is non-responsive, or just dazed, confused, out of it, then wave off the fight, doesn't answer the call. It looks even more impressive of a victory for Vergil Ortiz versus that quick of a stoppage, which most are critiquing that it was premature. And that took away a little bit from Vergil's victory. Nonetheless, he's back. And he looked great. And I hope he doesn't sit out long and he's right back into it. He's calling out Tim Tszyu. He's calling out Jermell Charlo. He wants anybody and everybody who's a threat at 154. Tim Tszyu replied to him via X, welcomed them to the 154, and said that he'd be more than willing to meet Ortiz in the ring. If Goldenboy's able to pull that off, what an amazing showdown we'll have on our hands. I'm glad he's back. I'm glad he's good. He's healthy. Seems to be in great spirits working with Robert Garcia and put on a hell of an event. Closed out the night in Vergil Ortiz fashion with another knockout. 20 wins, 20 knockouts. To explore a little bit more of the controversy regarding the stoppage, as of this episode, Tony Weeks ended up posting that the reason for the stoppage was that he had prior knowledge that Frederick Lawson had been submitted to 3 brain aneurysm tests, 2 which he had failed, passed the 3rd, and the fight was sanctioned by the commission to proceed. With that prior knowledge, Tony Weeks stated that that's the reason why he stepped in and stopped it. Which is the ugly side of boxing because the commission went forward with it. The commission issued a statement that both fighters were cleared, which is a vanilla type statement. Both fighters were cleared. They were good to go. And they passed the necessary tests. And they're going to continue looking into this matter. Tony Weeks has since deleted that message that he posted. But just the fact that it was out there, all of us got to see it. And that new narrative is out there. It's horrible for a referee to go into the ring hesitant instead of being able to fully focus on the fight at hand and enforce the rules and submerge himself into what he's witnessing. Now he has a notion and a bias of keeping an eye on one fighter versus watching the fight and keeping an eye on both. And if that's the case, it sucks that the commission would do that to a referee and put him in that position, compromised. compromise his judgment because he's walking in already observant of what may occur or what can occur, because he immediately wants to protect the fighter and not have somebody lose his life at his expense, at his hands, because he failed to respond. So that's the ugly side. By him taking down that statement, something must have come down from outside parties that he wasn't able to speak his mind and was asked to remove that statement. NSAC's Nevada State Athletic Commission, by issuing that type of statement, only gives more proof that Tony Weeks was speaking the truth and was asked to remove that. By saying, we will continue looking into this matter. No admission or denial, just vanilla. And we move on to another big boxing day, and all will be forgotten within a few days' time. It sucks, because this is a veteran of the sport who has been in some of the biggest fights. Hundreds of big events that he's refereed. Championship fights. He's been in there with all of them. All the big names you could think of. So the immediate critique post-fight was that he's old, he needs to retire, he needs to this, he's lost it. And then he issues a statement like that. And you're like, dang, this guy, he is a veteran of the sport. He knows what he's talking about. And now he's being muted. So we'll see how this develops. It adds a little bit of a stain to the overall event. But like I said in the opening, dang, we're already over an hour into this episode. Very long-winded. But thank you guys for sticking with me. And we'll close out with this. Just like I said at the beginning, there's no such thing as a mega event or a big event that doesn't lend itself to a little bit of controversy. There's bound to be some type of critique or controversy surrounding any big events. You look at a Super Bowl, people will criticize the halftime performance or whatever. A championship game, the World Cup, what have you. A big event like this. This was not the biggest event. It was a big coming out party, the opening to the boxing schedule for the year and so forth. So it was a big event, but it's not like it's a mega event like a Mayweather Pacquiao or a Spence Crawford or so forth, where a De La Hoya Trinidad, where there was controversy surrounding those decisions and judges and this and that, and it just leaves a stain on the sport. This one is not that. This was a big coming out party for Virgil Ortiz, a big all-around festivity and celebration for Goldenboy Promotions, and it was a solid event with solid fights, great matchmaking, and Virgil Ortiz performed. He looked good. It's what followed and the decision that Tony Weeks made that to stop the fight, but now there's a reason why he decided to do that, which we didn't have when the fight happened, obviously, and this is all coming after the fact. And that's where the controversy lies, but not that the event was swayed or robbery or this or the scorecards, or at least we didn't get to witness that. So great overall, great fight card overall. And it's awesome that Virgil Ortiz is back. A lot to look forward to this 2024. And hell, listen, if we're going to kick off 2024, what better than to do it like this in mega fashion? Over an hour-long episode. Thank you guys for tuning in with me. Thank you for taking me with you, whether you're out there on a walk or you're driving to or from work or you're working out or something. Thank you for letting me accompany you and join you for a little bit of your time. Thank you guys for all the love. Let's keep pushing forward as 2024. Let's kick off in big fashion. And I wish you all a happy new year. Lots of health, lots of success, and lots of love. Have yourselves a good night. I'm Head Cali. Toma Tudito Boxing Show.